What's going on, Soul Tribe? And welcome to Alchemist 8 Podcast. Justin here, and bringing another little nugget to add to the Soul Tribe archive. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Saturn in Capricorn in the 11th house. And this is not bad. This is not bad for Saturn to be in, especially if you have a date chart, which we'll talk about that here in a moment. But when you're talking about that Saturn, now Saturn is one of the more challenging planets. It is the considered the greater malefic, and so Saturn on a less constructive scale. Saturn can bring pettiness. Saturn is can bring about anxieties, and typically brings about that sense of laziness and sluggishness. It slows things down. There's hindrances. There's blocks. There can feel like things are just kind of cut off. There from just like there's just just kind of a suffocating feeling with Saturn. There can be a bit of downcast and this forlorn kind of melancholy with Saturn, a heaviness that comes kind of long term punishments and kind of chronic ailments and things are some things that Saturn can deal with. It's the bonds and things that keep us down. But there is, on a constructive note, let's get out of that. Saturn can bring about those who are, austere, and that can be very disciplined, very serious. There's a profundity even to Saturn that is really kind of fascinating. There can be sometimes concealments and secrets that come with Saturn, but Saturn can bring those of notable reputation because those who will put in that work, who will put in that discipline, who will show up each day and do the things, whether rain, shine, however we're feeling, is going to have very long lasting effects there. But Saturn really kind of takes you through, can take you through the ringer sometime. But then this is especially, if you're in a night chart, Saturn's going to be the most difficult planet for you. So that's something where you want to pay attention to the house that Saturn's in, and this is in the house that it rules, and any sort of aspects that it's making. And then in a day chart, Saturn is still challenging, but it's not as harsh as in a night chart. Is Saturnian things are conquerable challenges, things that feel more surmountable. When you're thinking about with Saturn, so that's just something to pay attention to. Saturn's not a light. Well, I mean, never mind. This is Saturn's. We just work with Saturn. Now, when you talk about Capricorn, moving on, Capricorn, this is why one reason why this is a great place for Saturn is because Capricorn is one of the signs that Saturn rules. And Capricorn is the cardinal earth sign, and they are one of the nocturnal signs or receptive in nature. And having that Saturnian influence on Capricorn, I think that Capricorn really does feel the weight of this responsibility. Just talking about just the body in general, that's a real earthly thing. That's, the beginning of you. But in everything, all of its responsibilities, the thing that it wants to build up, I think that where Capricorn can develop really great things, it's something that does take time with Saturn, something that you have to show up every day for, and you have to show up with very limited resources. But I think that sometimes it's in that maybe those limitations that it's what makes Capricorn, I think, a very resourceful sign, makes it it's a very practical sign. It's going to consider all of the things taken, really taking all the factors and things before it's going to make a move. But when you see Capricorn moving, something's up, something's up, and it's going to be something big. I think, but again, it's just something that I think takes time, but something that they can get recognized for as well. Getting through those Saturnian challenges. Now, when you talk about the 11th house, this is a really nice house too. This was known as the house of good spirit. So again, we love that. And this is actually really interesting because, well, first, the significations for this is a succeeding house, and some of the significators of the 11th house deals with like your friends, groups, alliances, and like your hopes and dreams and things like that with Saturn or with the 11th house. So when you're working with this placement, a couple of things to consider. One, you would have a Pisces rising by whole sign, and you don't have to look too far to see who rules this house because Saturn does. And Saturn is going to import the themes of the 12th house to this house. And this is what makes this interesting because the 12th house is the house of bad spirit. And the and some of the themes that house indicates is going to deal with like enemies, especially kind of like hidden enemies, sicknesses like long-term kind of chronic ailments and things, depressions like that, loss, seclusion or isolation, troubles, sorrows. Yeah, those sort of just really kind of fun topics. Those are going to be some of the themes that Saturn imports, or those are going to be the themes that Saturn imports to that house. So I'm going to kind of split this up a little bit, kind of talk about this where if this is a night chart. Again, this area may be one of the harder areas for you when it comes to possibly maybe it's making that connection with friends. It could be maybe people tend to be maybe a bit cold or distant. That's something that Saturn can do. Maybe there's this feeling ostracized, possibly, not being able to find one's, where one belongs, or maybe there's a lot of work that comes in with that. There could be, again, that like the sort of pettiness that comes with Saturn. There, those sort of hidden enemies. This gives me like sort of like gossip, and things like along those lines, the things that are said when you're not around, and it doesn't have to materialize like that, but that may be something where there may be some challenges with that, or maybe even too thinking about like your hopes and dreams and things like that. You may have these ambitions and whatnots, but again, with Saturn and Capricorn, there is that realization that it's going to take work, and they're going to be, especially I would think for kind of like depending on the rest of the chart, of course, for like a water rising, sometimes when the feelings are coming up, when you're feeling low and down, it can be hard to move out of that sometimes. So that may be, because again, Saturn can really kind of work on us. It's hard to get a grasp on Saturn until that first Saturn return, where it's like it's different than with the other planets. They do pretty regular cycles. Saturn takes a while to get around the chart there. So to understand how every aspect of Saturn is. And that would be something too, as you're kind of following those aspects of Saturn, see how those groups and alliances change over time. And again, I feel like that's something where it may start off as a difficult thing, but it's something that will improve with time. And not that I feel not from debasing oneself or lowering oneself. It's learning those, who's willing to let you, who's there through the tough times, and who maybe those sort of like fair weather friends. That may be something that may show up in that 11th house, or maybe there might be some things around loss around friends and things like that. But I do think that on a more kind of like a constructive sense, I do think that Saturn can do well with managing groups. I think that that's something where, it may not be maybe the most friendliest, but it may be the one that is the most structured, because especially when you're looking for a leader, you want someone who has that very practical mind, who's going to, who's holding the vision, who's able to get people in order, who understands, who know how to deal with the sort of like the hidden enemies and things like that, and again, like in a constructive way, of course, when I'm talking about with Saturn. But I can see that Saturn bringing in those people who can support, you kind of long term there, and those kind of long lasting things. But it may be something that, again, you just have to work at building those connections, doing those networking things, getting people, coming out of seclusion, if that's something you notice in yourself, maybe, in this has made you kind of self-conscious. Saturn is sextiling the ascendant, so that, just by whole sign, but especially if it's doing it by aspect, it's not the most positive aspect, but it's the next best one. And so there still can be opportunities created there if you keep that hope alive, especially with the succeeding houses. Again, those are houses that, again, that take a minute to build up, but once they get going, it's going, but this could be someone too who can help other people deal with their 12th house things, when they're going through those times of loss, through times of sorrow, through times of tribulations, or when there are ever certain areas in life, whether it's 6th house things, 8th house things, or wherever there happens to be hardness, or trickiness that's going on there. I think that Saturn is one that will be able to learn from other people's experience, to be able to help you take, advice that you've given from other people, things that you've learned from other people, and kind of pass that along to raise other people's hopes as well, to give them, possibilities of a new day. Or maybe this is something too where maybe you happen to be working in, I find when we kind of 12th house things, maybe this is something where you do work with people who are dealing with like kind of maybe chronic illnesses, or maybe people who are in some sort of like isolation for some reason or another. Or this could be where maybe you can, I can see this as creating some sort of place of healing, for other people, depending on, again, it's going to depend on the rest of the chart, of course. But I do think that Saturn, considering that it's not Saturn flowing to the 12, there's something here about, I think, Saturn trying to, that battle between good spirit and bad spirit. I think that there's something there, because Saturn can represent like spirit possessions, and so it's helping getting those period, where when we're going through those harsh times, when we get in our head, because sometimes those hidden enemies can be just like that voice in our head that tries to bring us down sometimes. And so Saturn can help again bring that back up, which is, that's dope for Saturn. But it feels like maybe it's not quite through maybe like how Venus or like how Jupiter would do it. It feels maybe it might be a bit more stern, it might be a bit more strict, it might be where you have to be a bit more kind of like tough love when we're talking about, dealing with these sort of topics there. But, that may be something that you just kind of learn down the line. And sort of people who, because the thing is, you can't help everyone. You can only help those who are receptive to that. And so that may be something over time where you have to, where that, again, that group and that friend, the people that, once hoped and dreamed with, that may evolve over time, and so that's something I think to really just kind of contemplate there. But those would be just some sort of like base themes that I would just kind of talk about with this one. You definitely need the whole chart to get an idea of how this could be showing up for you, if you're showing up for you. But if you have this placement or know someone who's working with this placement, down in the comment section, let us know how this has showed up for you, if you feel comfortable with that. Because I know, malefic things can be a bit harder to definitely to talk about. So if that's something where, if you're wanting to learn how to navigate that placement more, you get to just know your chart, just more personally, navigate the different transits and things like that. Down in the description box, there's a link to book a consultation with me, so definitely check that out. And if you have any questions about the services that I provide, there is my email down there, so definitely feel free to reach out. And if you want to support the work that I'm doing further, you can just go to my Patreon, where I have a couple of tiers there. One of them tier one is for the Lucky Day podcast, which just talks about the most auspicious days for the month for any endeavor that you're wanting to do in your life. That's what that's there for, to help give that extra support. And then the second tier includes the podcast plus a personalized transit report from me each month. So that was the next best thing to getting a personal reading with me. So definitely check that out if that's something that you're interested in. Then last couple of things, there's a few playlists down there as well. One of them is for Celestial News Weekly, Celestial News Monthly, which talks about where the sun and the other classical planets are transiting, what signs are going to be most affected, and how to most practically work with those energies. And the other one is the Lunar Shenanigans. And that's a weekly show that just talks about the astrology of the moon, what sign it's in, what phase it's in, when it happens to go void of course, which is actually here soon, and in about a month. And yeah, just to get a general feel of the energy as the moon is distributing these conversations that is happening with the different celestial bodies. So there's another thing to just kind of tune in there. But that's all I got for you. So until next time, stay mindful out there. Keep raising that vibration through the roof. And I will catch you on the next one later.